We are standing on the site where Qumran is, on the northern side of the Dead Sea. This site became biblically significant even for us as modern Christians because a Bedouin was out with his sheep and he threw a rock up at a cave right here at this site, and he heard the crash of something that almost sounded glass-like. And what he did was climb up and he found scrolls in this cave. This was what kicked off the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
And it puzzled me, how did they go that many years and not be discovered, until you actually look at some of these caves and how high up and how difficult it would be to go and enter the caves. So I could easily see the Dead Sea Scrolls being undiscovered for a large number of years. So that was really interesting.
We found all these ancient handwritten copies of the Old Testament that predated any of the earliest manuscripts. That had a significant impact. It tells us that the Bible you and I carry to church or to a synagogue is the same Bible that they had. So we have discovered the supreme accuracy of the transmission of the biblical text, both Old Testament and now, of course, New Testament manuscripts, so that we have a certainty that the Bible has been preserved well by God, even by this group who lived here. They were recluse. They were a bit of protesters against the corruption of the temple and the Romans and all that, but because of their severity of discipline, they preserved those documents only to be found about 2,000 years later.
The Essene people were there initially around the 180 BC, and they lasted in that area to about 70 AD. They were young men. They had taken a vow generally of celibacy, certainly of isolationism. They felt they could strengthen their faith by staying away from Jerusalem and away from the other Jewish people. But it gave them a time to pray, it gave them a time to eat together, it gave them a time to focus on God, and that led to them studying Scripture, and that's how they ultimately transcribed many of the scrolls. I think that the Essene people were more interested in finding the truth than what we saw from Pharisees. They wanted to go back to Scripture and study it and really try to not so much interpret as it was to absorb it. They did live through the time of Christ, and I think they had a better view of Him. Whether or not they accepted Him as Messiah, I think is still questionable, but I think in many cases they did.